Ja, der nächste Vortrag ist von Clive Bates. Er hat erfunden das Counterfactual Consulting in London, UK. Und Clive ist für mich so eine Figur, die Harm Reduction für Tobacco wirklich erfunden hat, nach vorne gebracht hat. Also er gibt einen monatlichen Bericht heraus und wöchentlich werden die Studien, die es gibt in der Welt zu Tobacco Harm Reduction, veröffentlicht. Also wer daran Interesse hat, sollte Clive die E-Mail geben und wird versorgt wirklich mit den neuesten Entwicklungen. Ich weiß gar nicht, wie er das schafft, wöchentlich alles aufzuarbeiten, aber er gibt uns wirklich die zentralen neuen Studien an die Hand, mit denen wir argumentieren können. Und dass es nötig ist, haben wir eben von Ben gehört, ganz wichtig, wie wir auch unser Ministerium am Ende dazu bringen können, Endgame nicht als etwas, was vom Himmel fällt, zu betrachten, sondern wofür wir jetzt arbeiten müssen, wofür wir jetzt Pläne machen müssen und Mittel allokieren müssen und vieles mehr. So, vielen Dank aus London, Clive Bates für Sie heute. Bitte.
Hi everyone. Before I get started, first of all, I'm so sorry I can't speak to you in German. My German is utterly pathetic. And I should say I have no conflicts of interest, don't receive money from any of the industries involved, but I have been an advocate for tobacco harm reduction since 1997. So I come with all of those biases. I have a lot of material to go through, a lot of things to show you. We're going to go through a lot of data and slides and graphics. We'll go quite quickly. Hopefully each time you'll see an idea or something from an image. Am I using this? No. This. Yeah. I started in the tobacco policy field in 1997. I would like to say it was a much simpler time then. Basically, we had cigarettes, lots of them. We had shops that sold them. We had tasteless advertisements like this one. We had smoking in restaurants and bars and pretty well everywhere, and you couldn't breathe and you smelt a lot as a result. We had stupid ways of testing cigarettes that people dressed up to be very scientific and everything, but all they did was mislead everybody. We had scandals like false harm reduction, like we had the idea that you could have light or mild cigarettes, which didn't really make any difference to your health, but they did help with marketing cigarettes. We had really evil bad guys, and they were nearly all guys. These sort of gentlemen were, in 1994, at a congressional hearing in the United States, lying their heads off about smoking. So we had the tobacco industry as a common enemy. It was like a great time. It was like everything was perfect, you know, there was evil everywhere you looked. There was an unbelievably large amount of harm caused. We had smoking killing around 8 million people annually. That happens to be about the same as COVID-19. This is worldwide. Excess mortality from COVID-19 was about 8 million a year in 2020 and 2021. So we had just a gigantic health problem, and this was what we were in business to do in 1997. It was a simple time. We had our policy measures, we had like warning labels, bans and everything. You'd be familiar with all of those. We also had, we had interesting trends. We had smoking prevalence coming down, but the population was going up, and actually what was happening was the total amount of smoking in the world was actually increasing, despite all of this effort. It's an area worldwide, at least, dominated by men. There are about 5 times as many men who smoke as women. Both have been trending down, but the ratios remain more or less the same. And because it's a massive thing among men, it's also the thing that does the most damage to men in the world. And this is the global burden of disease risk. So this is disability-adjusted life years lost among men, and tobacco comes out of the top of this type of risk factor. Okay, so we've got a pretty simple situation in back in 1997. And you could put down a list of goals like this. These are all things you know, we used to come to work to do these things, you know, improve welfare, reduce harm, cut disease, reduce smoking, tobacco, nicotine, substance use, reduce second-hand smoking, protect everybody. And basically, when there was just smoking, you could just say, our goals are like all of the above. We could do all of these things by getting people to quit smoking, okay? Unfortunately, the world has become more complicated since then. And now we have to make choices between these goals, because it might be possible to reduce smoking while increasing nicotine use. Okay? It might be possible to reduce passive smoking exposure, but increase passive vaping exposure or increase use of pouches. So we're suddenly gone from a world of clarity and certainty and unity in goals to having to make a series of trade-offs. And those trade-offs have revealed differing underlying goals amongst people in the field. You now have to choose. Are you trying to get rid of nicotine? Are you a war on drugs kind of person? Or are you trying to get rid of serious disease? Because those are not one and the same thing anymore. Okay, so how should you sort of cope with this changed world? And the first thing is, you have to understand the thing you're dealing with. And Carl has already said it, and I think Ben probably said it too, but the first thing to understand is the underlying cause of the disease. So people use nicotine because they like it, it makes them feel better, it makes them feel as though they function better. But they die from the smoke inhalation, the tar. It's the absolutely central thing to get a grip on. It's a slight oversimplification, but more or less that is the way to understand what we're dealing with. Okay, now, why do people use nicotine? It's like almost I'll use a German word, verboten question, was it a Denkverbot, is you're not allowed to ask the question why people use nicotine, okay? And the answer is it produces rewarding psychoactive effects. You know, that's why people use drugs. You know, newsflash. That's why people use drugs. And one of the great experts in the world on nicotine is Professor Neil Benowitz. And he put up this remarkable slide, I think, you know, summarizing his sort of lifetime of experience here on so-called benefits of nicotine use. Look at this. Non-medical benefits: pleasure, stimulation, cognitive enhancement, relaxation, mood modulation, psychiatric benefit, enhanced athletic performance, and weight control. And when he put that up, I thought, where on earth can I get this drug? It sounds absolutely amazing. I need to start using this. Now, of course, not quite as simple as that. And he adds this caveat that some of these benefits may be perceived rather than real. But nevertheless, and this is not a recommendation to use nicotine, it's an explanation. It's why people use nicotine, because they feel as though they're getting something from it. And in my view, it's why people are going to continue using nicotine indefinitely. It's not going to just go away. I mean, if anyone can name popular drugs that have just disappeared, there are probably a few, maybe barbiturates, Queludes, but almost all drugs that people have liked at any time have persisted indefinitely. Okay, and nicotine use will persist indefinitely. Now, big change in what's happened is that is on the tar side of that equation. You can now use nicotine without the tar. And I use this to explain the marketplace as it's evolved now. So we have a 2x2 matrix, nicotine and tobacco-based, heated and unheated. And you know what these are here. There's vapes, there's heated tobacco products, There's oral nicotine products such as the pouches that Carl Olaf was discussing, and then there's smokeless tobacco like the snus that we were discussing earlier. Okay, and that is changed the landscape now. Those are the products that can substitute for cigarette smoking, and if they do, there are huge health benefits from doing that. I'm not going to go into all the evidence, and Nicola put some of it up earlier, but essentially we have a whole body of scientific assessments where people have said these products are unlikely to, exceed 5% of the risk of smoking, far less harmful, small fraction of the risks, toxicants much lower, and so on and so on. So it's not like there's uncertainty about this. We are confident beyond any reasonable doubt that these products collectively, because there's no combustion, are much safer than smoking. Okay, this is typical bit of evidence here I've lifted from a study. So what people do is they look at the range of chemicals, and as Nicholas says, they're all unpronounceable, these things along here. But what you see is the reduction in these biomarkers of toxic exposure. So that's going from 0 down to minus 100%. And you can see really deep reductions here. The orange bars are, the orange and gray bars are two kinds of vape, and the blue bar is abstinence. Okay, so that's what happens when somebody stops. And you can see they are very, very similar. Almost all of the toxins, these are biomarkers of exposure, not biomarkers of harm. So these are toxicants in the blood, saliva, or urine. These go right the way down, and that gives us a sense that these products are going to be much less dangerous. And again, we've already seen a version of this chart. I think Carl Olaf showed this. But again, this shows that we have the ability here to play on a really radically different levels of risk within the range of commercial consumer nicotine products, going right down to, it's like a small fraction, a few percentage points here compared to smoking. I don't really like the sort of medicalization of this. This is a consumer phenomenon. It's going on, people buying these products as alternatives to smoking. They're not generally going to doctors and being given them as smoking cessation aids. But I find this equation, which is sort of idiotically simple, an interesting way of just thinking about this. So the harm reduction public health effect is really a function of these two characteristics. How much lower is the risk, and what's the net number of people who switch and try these things, okay? Now, we've already discussed the product toxicity and other risks, so that's something that we can know and measure from exposure biomarker studies and so on. This is the more interesting one. Okay, what causes people to use this? Okay, you could have a fantastic smoking cessation medication, but if no one's willing to use it, then it doesn't make much public health impact. Okay, so you have to take that into account. And who uses it is a function of how appealing it is. Do I want to use this thing? Do I like this raspberry lemonade flavor? Do I like this key lime pie flavor? The appeal is what gets people to try these things in the first place. And then, what is the person's experience with the product like? Is it convenient? Does it deliver nicotine? Does it taste nice? Does it satisfy me in a way that cigarettes used to? So these are the characteristics that go into the harm reduction proposition, okay? And if you don't have these, or if regulators do things to destroy these or degrade them, then it won't work so well from a harm reduction point of view. This is like the simplification and brilliant risk communication in my view. So this is the English National Health Service, which is like the sort of equivalent of the Red Army in Britain. It's just a massive workforce of people, but it's our National Health Service. It just has very straightforward messages. Known as vapes or e-cigs, they are far less harmful than cigarettes and can help you quit smoking for good. Perfect. perfect messaging there. It's giving people the reassurance of a big health brand and a simple message about safety and efficacy. Okay? And then a cautionary tale. They're not recommended for non-smokers and cannot be sold to people under 18. So it's balancing the two things, the proposition to smokers and a warning to non-smokers and young people. Okay? Now this is, I mentioned that it's really important that these things are popular. This is a breakdown from a recent study done by the UCL group showing the methods that people use to quit smoking in England. Okay, and that's the, you can see the bar there, e-cigarettes, NRT, and right down to these things that are notionally quite effective, but are just not used very much. Okay, so they're not having a big public health impact. So when we look at the results of trials, we also have to think about this side of the equation. How many people are willing to use them and why? Started to have effects in Britain. This is a trend downwards. You can see the rise of e-cigarettes there as the orange bar, and that accelerated the decline in smoking prevalence in the UK. That's puts us roughly on track to get to our 5% target by 2030. Not clear to me whether this will continue because the government in England, for its sins, has changed its approach to this and has become much more hostile recently. This is a situation in Japan with heated tobacco here. The heated tobacco products are in the orange bar there. And we've seen a very, very large reduction we've seen around a 50% reduction in cigarette consumption over a period of about 10 years, which I think is amazing, actually. And that's because people are using nicotine in a different way. If you look at the decline in nicotine use, it's much less than the decline in smoking. And that's where the harm reduction benefit has come in. I won't go into this in detail because this is Ben's presentation in one slide, but here you can see massive increases in vaping amongst the Maori population, which is the ones in red here, and then this anomalous decline. Amazing change, game changer amongst a highly disadvantaged population in New Zealand. Fantastic change there. Ben deserves a huge, he's a very modest guy, but he deserves a huge amount of credit for that. And then here we go, this is Sweden. Okay, now this I think, I'm going to show something interesting here, because again, the orange here is total nicotine use, okay? And let's get this up here. That's Sweden on the end. The blue is the smoking rate. So we saw a chart like this from Carl Olaf earlier. But Sweden does not have an unusually low level of nicotine use. It just consumes it in a different way through snus. Now, I just want to highlight Germany on, oh, hang on, that's low smoking, high nicotine use, okay, relatively speaking, in terms of the European Union. I just want to highlight Germany on this chart here. So there you can see Germany actually has a lower level of total nicotine use than Sweden, but it has a much higher level of smoking. Now, which would you choose? Would you like to have less nicotine and more smoking, or more smoking, or do you want to be more like Sweden, with a low level of smoking and a high level of nicotine use? Well, let me help you with that. This is lung cancer mortality, Sweden versus Germany. Okay, and you can see here a massive difference. Lung cancer rate amongst men in Sweden is about half the lung cancer rate in Germany. Okay, and that is mostly down to differences in the nature of tobacco and nicotine use. Now, a lot of people at this point say, aha, what about oral cancer? Because this is all about, people getting, mouth cancer from chewing snus or whatever, sucking on snus. Well, I thought we'd also have that. I plotted it on the same scale after some trial and error with the IARC website. And here you can see, first of all, it's much lower in absolute terms, but Germany is still roughly twice as much as Sweden, and that's because smoking is a risk factor for oral cancer as well, okay? So I just think that captures you know, the difference in those curves, as Carl, I think it was Carl Oates was saying, is thousands and thousands of needless deaths. And yet, of course, in our brilliance, snus, the reason for the difference in these curves, is banned in Germany and the rest of the EU, other than Sweden, in one of the worst public health decisions and measures of all time, for which no one has yet apologized but should do. All right, the critical population, next stage here. I'm just looking at my time. Understanding the critical population. All right, now, almost, are we okay? Okay, all right, fine. Almost all of the attention goes on youth, okay? But this is actual numbers. This is United States, but it will be more or less similar in Germany and the UK. It's very similar in the UK, okay? There's about a 15-fold, about 15 times as many adults involved in this. And prevalence might be lower, but in terms of just sheer numbers, the weight of illness and disease, the public health issue is in the smoking and dual use, okay? The public health problem is in middle-aged adults who are still smoking, aging into their 40s, 50s, and 60s, beginning to get cardiovascular disease, cancer, respiratory illnesses, and so on. There's virtually no focus on them. Down here, you see a tremendous amount of focus on youth vaping, and people are just going wild about this. And I would like to try and discuss that a little bit more later on. But this is the public health problem. The public health problem, it's the same in the UK, same in Germany, is existing adults who smoke today who are aging into ill health in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. I also think it's useful to think here, Ben showed something like this in his presentation just now, about how smoking will end. And it will end, believe me. Okay? So this is United States data, and it's a breakdown by age. Each of these columns is a breakdown by age. And the orange bars are smoking, and the blue bars are vaping. The light blue bars are never having vaped before, never smoked before, rather. And then the hash bar is dual use, i.e. using both, okay? Now, there's two effects going on. There are changes in the stock and changes in the flow, okay? So what we see here is those blue bars are pressing down on the orange bars, okay, as people switch from smoking to vaping, okay? So as time goes on, more people within each age category switch from smoking to vaping, and that reduces the height of those orange bars, okay? Now that's much slower than we would like, and it's much, you know, not been particularly effective, as people have said, in older age groups, but that's only one of the dynamics that's going on. The other is that there are people who are never smoking in the first place in the younger age group, or switching from smoking to vaping in the younger age group, and they are aging into the population, okay? So what you see there is a cohort growing up that has never really got into smoking in a big way. And let me illustrate that, how dramatic and rapid that change has been. If you just concentrate on the left-hand bar there, the one marked 18 to 24, okay? That's that bar, okay? Let's look at that bar as it was in 2014. And I think this is amazing, okay? When you look at the 18 to 24 category at age, in 2014 to 2023, there's been a 78% reduction in smoking, 87% reduction in exclusive smoking amongst 18 to 24-year-olds. That habit has almost died out in the United States now. Okay, smoking is almost gone in young people and young adult population. And, you know, a lot of people will kind of panic here and say, well, look, they didn't smoke before they were vaping. So these are people who never smoked, who took up vaping, and 99% of the news flow says, well, that's a totally terrible thing. But it's not, because the counterfactual is that those people in a world without vaping would have carried on smoking. In other words, the column would have looked like that column from 2014. So what we've really seen is a massive displacement of smoking. Right, I'm going to crack on now. Right, now on to, is tobacco control losing control? Okay, are the ideas that we had in 1997, and you know, I was the director of Action on Smoking and Health in the UK at that time, and everything was cool, we knew what we were doing. Are those ideas still useful today? And my issue is, I think they are not. This is something I said in a prediction. 2019, regulators will start to be taught lessons about the limits of their power by consumers, markets, internet commerce, and overseas entrepreneurs. Okay, so that was me in 2019, and this presentation, the rest of this presentation is why I think that is so. Okay, first of all, I think it's helpful to think about regulation. And two types of regulation. The first is consumer protection. So it's standards that we apply, chemical safety, electrical, thermal, labeling that's informative, consumer redress, what to do if there's an accident, whatever. Okay? That tends not to be problematic. It increases confidence in the products. It gives consumers a better product. It's what regulation is usually used for. But there's another type of regulation which is aimed to create behavior change. It's designed to stop you using the product, stop other people using it, designed to promote cessation, designed to... These things like taxes, restrictions, bans, prohibitions, and so on, those are much more problematic, and they're much more prone to unintended consequences because people don't like to have their behavior changed. They resist in various ways. And these are three broad categories, a kind of dark triad of unintended consequences that I normally think about when thinking about regulation. The first is adverse behavior change. So people, you think you've banned this product, you've banned flavored vapes, everyone will stop using flavored vapes, but actually they go back to smoking. Okay, so you've made things worse. It's an unintended consequence. It's foreseeable, but it's unintended. Second is you stimulate illicit trade. People say, well, you can't buy from legal entities anymore. You'll have to buy from illegal. And a market of criminals, informal economy, potentially right up to cartel-size operations begin to supply this. We're seeing cartels getting involved, by the way, in Mexico, where there is a complete prohibition of vapes now, and that trade is now run by the cartels. Not really a win for anyone, definitely not for public health. And then finally, workarounds. So what people do is they say, well, I can't buy flavored vapes at the supermarket, so I'll buy an unflavored one and I'll add the flavor myself. I'll buy it from a shop and I'll mix it myself, or there's a whole range of things that people can do to work around regulation. But sometimes that makes the whole thing more risky. You've got people mixing their own liquids. That's more risky than it being mixed in a high-quality, clean room type environment in a factory. Okay? Other things that have happened to make this more complicated. Okay, I don't think the market is governable in the way it once was. We now have long supply chains starting in China with much containerization. I'll come back to that in a minute. Giant amount of social media, where we just used to have like billboards before. We now have these now famous Signal, Telegram, and WhatsApp encrypted but not totally secure communications, international payment systems, and cryptocurrencies. All of which facilitates illicit trade or facilitates unregulated trade, okay, in a way that didn't exist in 1997. Okay, so high and rising diversity. So we've got these are aspects of why it's ungovernable. Just a huge number of products now. In Germany alone, over 400,000 vape products have been added to the registry, maybe up to 1 million in the European Union as a whole. We're seeing a gigantic expansion from China. So this is exports from China. I'm going to hurry up a bit now. We've seen a 9-fold growth since 2017 to 2022. And the total Chinese export market now, which is powering the whole world of vapes, has reached 11 billion in 2024 and around, now hitting around $1 billion a month, $1 billion a month. So that's become a very, very large market, which is now supplying most of the global, particularly the illicit markets. Unregulated trade. Australia has created an incredibly risk-averse, incredibly restrictive environment. Has it worked? No, it has not worked. Okay, around 94% of Australia's vape products now are sold illicitly via criminal networks, via illegal imports. So they have a very small amount of the market, is very tightly regulated, but most of the market is not regulated at all. Okay, it's a complete failure. The contrast with New Zealand is extremely striking. Same with the United States. Germany has over 400,000 licensed vape products. The United States has 34. Okay? The vast majority of products sold in the United States are essentially unregulated and unauthorized products. Okay? They have around 4,000 cigarette products, though, so it's kind of like uneven. Brazil, just picking this out of random, there's around 40 countries now that have banned e-cigarettes completely. When you ban a product, it doesn't disappear. It just means it's sold by someone else, by illegal actors, and the products are sold in an unregulated environment without any controls whatsoever. And we know that illicit markets, thrive. And we look at cannabis. This is cannabis in the United States. Around 22% of 12th graders use cannabis in the past 30 days. That's been a consistent for around 25 years, 30 years. So it's not like it should be a surprise that illicit markets take over when you introduce prohibitions. Another kind of workarounds that you get. These are European countries, and thank you to e-cig Intelligence for this, European countries that don't ban online sales, so they allow online sales, okay? The blue is visits to internet sites in the country, and the orange is traffic to foreign websites. These are online sales countries where it's banned, Austria, Belgium, Finland, and Hungary. Most of the traffic goes overseas, and essentially there's cross-border trade happens here. Okay? So it's not like this worked as intended. There was a workaround. There was a different form of doing the trade. Anyone recognize that? That's Hamburg. Largest port in Germany, third largest in the EU. Containerization. Let's just talk about that for a minute. This is how e-cigarettes come into a country, packaged like this. Okay? They come in containers like this, from China mainly. That's a 20-foot container, and that's the usual unit of measuring container volume in a port. Okay? So that's it's called a 20-foot equivalent unit is that sort of container. Now, you get a feel for the size of this trade. These are what container ships can carry now. The biggest container ships can carry up to 25,000 20-foot equivalent containers. The trade is absolutely gigantic. Now, how many containers do you think pass through Hamburg every day? Any votes? Any guesses? Not 1 million. That would be a lot. A day, 21,000 per day, okay, are passing through Hamburg. Through the European Union, I've marked Hamburg in orange, that's 7.7 million a year. 200,000 containers per day are passing through the largest 20 EU ports, so Rotterdam and Antwerp being slightly larger, okay? Now, if you think you can deal with 200,000 containers a day, you've got to remember, this is a Europol report on criminal networks in ports, only 2% of these containers are inspected, okay? And it's almost impossible to imagine them being able to contain these imports, illegal, misclassified, misnotified, and so on. And you also have established criminal actors in ports as well. So this is the situation in these ports. Criminal networks have made use of vulnerabilities in the container system. They basically bribe people, and the illegal trade is lost in this massive flow of legal trade. Okay, it's almost impossible to contain this. I'm going to speed up a bit now. New communications. Okay, newsflash, there's been a massive increase in social media. We didn't have this in 1997. We didn't have 5 billion people as content creators. Any one of them can create an advert or create promotion, can chatter with each other, they can be paid or whatever. We didn't have YouTube, we didn't have Facebook. We're now at the point where these things are beginning to outweigh the television as a source of information. There are more social media users than there are television users in the United States. We now have new forms of commerce. This is a message from somebody, it's actually sent to me, offering to ship illicit Chinese products using WhatsApp as the basis, as the sort of commercial platform for doing it. Here's somebody on Reddit accessing a thread about how to use Telegram to offer disposable vapes on a wholesale basis, okay? Now, I just think we have to be aware of these. So they're completely different models of trade to what we had before. We also have innovation. We're not going to go into this. This is a diagram of the innovation system in China. It's amazing. It's constantly producing new stuff. They will innovate to get round regulations. So they're going to get round the disposable ban in the UK. Tank size. Here's another thing. Okay. The market, these lines here are the tank size in North America, okay? And they've gone up to around 14, 15 milliliters per device. These are the European ones, okay? So there's France, Germany in there. That's because there's a 2 milliliter limit in the EU, okay? For no real reason, but the consumer preference has moved to large, so-called big puff devices. So that has created an illicit opportunity. That's an example of really ill-conceived regulation that has created an illicit opportunity. And we now have large numbers of these big puff vapes flowing into Europe because that's what consumers want. And we know that's what they want because that's what they want in the United States, North America. Flavor bans, okay? This is just a picture of the kind of flavors, the thousands of flavors that are used, integral to the appeal of these products. Here is a presentation from a semi-official Dutch source, RIVM, talking about the ban of e-liquids other than tobacco flavor in the Netherlands, okay? And amazingly, in this presentation at slide 34, they put up this list of unintended consequences. DIY flavoring, less attractive for smoking cessation purposes, decreased ends use, increased cigarette use, increased use of illicit markets. And I'm like, okay, what are you going to say now? And the answer was nothing. We just moved straight on, just ignored that. But these consequences are more serious than the actual consequences of the thing that we're trying to control, okay? The unintended consequences in this case are the main consequences. You can already see DIY kits for making flavors. This has happened in response to the menthol ban. These are sort of menthol inserts or ways of re-mentholizing cigarettes. Tremendous amount of ingenuity goes into this. And I'm just going to jump through this. This is research findings. hopefully get this later. But look, here we go. There's been quasi-experimental research done in the United States on flavor bans, comparing states. What they found is that where you get a flavor ban, you get additional cigarettes. You get substitution back towards traditional smoking or inducing substitution to combustible cigarette smoking. So we have evidence here of the unintended consequences arising from a flavor ban, yet everybody's still concerned to do it. But the consequence would be more smoking. So I think you should take a system view. Basically 4 types of regulatory philosophy. You either ban things, you treat things like a pharmaceutical, you treat things like cigarettes, or you use risk proportionate regulation. And I'm campaigning for risk proportionate regulation. When you're thinking about regulation, you're really creating a context in which consumers make decisions. So you tax, you regulate, you have healthcare practitioners and expert advice, you have communications like the communication I showed from the NHS, or from manufacturers or from the government or the chief doctors or whatever, and you have regulation. And depending on how you go about those things, you can get different consequences. You may get abstinence, but if you do it wrong, you may get adverse behavior change, illicit sales, and workarounds. And that's where I think we're at now. Right, I'm just going to just look at how you would go about this if you accept the limits of tobacco control. First of all, rethink nicotine, okay? Got to rethink it. It's there to stay. It can't be eliminated. People like it. People will continue to use it. We have to get into the same mental box as other common recreational substances. Caffeine, alcohol, cannabis. They're all different. They all have different properties and different risks, but that's where we need to put it. Again, Michael Russell, brilliant man. There is no compelling objection to recreational or even addictive use of nicotine, providing it is not shown to be physically, psychologically, or socially harmful to use it or to others. And we now have products that can deliver that, particularly, I would say, the nicotine pouches. Here is a famous tobacco control expert. The challenge to me is not to eliminate smoking, but death and disease from smoking. That should be the end goal. If you had a product that addicted 45 million people and killed none of them, then I would take that deal. Then you have coffee, which again, Carl, is your point. Guess who said this? Matt Myers, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, the leading anti-vaping activist in the world, I would say, until he retired fairly recently. Okay. Second, so you need a rethink of nicotine. Second thing is you absolutely must keep the market legal. As soon as you lose control of the market and it becomes illicit, then it's all regulated by violence. There's no controls over the products. There's no controls over who they sell to, what else they sell, what their model of commerce is. You have to keep it, and this is Australia. We've now had over 200 fire bombings of shops as gangs have fought each other for territory in that. Making these products illegal is the worst possible thing. And the way that you'd stop them becoming illegal is to give people basically what they want. Here we go. Wheat vape laws, allowing kids to interact with organized criminals. Kids, everyone was worried about kids, but kids join the supply chain when it becomes illegal. They're not just consumers, they become suppliers. They become the kids handing out the vapes in the playgrounds and so on. There aren't many good cases of a market going from illegal to legal. And one I could think of was Kazaa, which was a music streaming service that was popular in the 90s and 2000s. And it ultimately got replaced by, here we go, a sort of retro iTunes store, okay? And that worked because the genius of Apple was to provide people what they wanted at an affordable price in a regulated commercial environment. And we should learn from that because there's not that many examples of clawing back the illegal market. Right, work through consent, not coercion. So the idea that the state bullies people or coerces or uses a toolbox of coercion, punishment, restriction, stigma, That no longer works. People won't suffer that now. We should be looking for, in Tobacco Control 2.0, respecting people's autonomy, allowing them to operate through informed consent, respect and empathy. That's how we should be treating nicotine users, not through this punitive, coercive and stigmatizing package of measures. Regulate for users. You should be thinking about consumer protection here for the low-risk users. And I would say, I'm nearly finished now, I would say risk-proportionate regulation. So take in those in red, that's the regulatory scheme for the most harmful products down the right there. Vaping, heated tobacco, smokeless and oral tobacco, the much safer products. Low taxes, control themes rather than ban advertising, messages about risk communication, encouraging switching and so on. So you don't have the same type of regulation, you change it according to the risk. And then concerns about youth, well, let's just remember, a lot of the youth, this is sort of typical British youth, but we have to remember a lot of the kids who would have been smoking in the past and who are vaping now would have come from pretty tough backgrounds. Their parents would have smoked, they wouldn't be doing well at school, they might have other substance use issues. It's a win when they switch to vaping, even if it's uncomfortable for a lot of people to reconcile that. It's a win if they are vaping and not smoking. So let's bear that in mind. And a realistic youth agenda, again, you've got to understand what's going on with young people. You need a lawful market. Kids aren't helped at all by vapes or cigarettes supplied by illegal actors. Age-secure retailing. Responsible marketing, not using silly, childish cartoons or imagery or anything. And we're going to be truthful about it. We need to respect them because they sniff out misinformation from authority figures. Anyway, finally, my very final part of this, I'm sorry I've overrun a little, we should be realists and proud, okay? Now this is heartbreaking, okay? This is a paper from 1994 in Nature. Okay, and it relates to United States data, okay, by Brad Rodoux and Phil Cole, okay. Now, I can't hardly spit this out. This is I've just blown up the chart that's in the middle of that, and what it does is it shows the mortality rate by age for non-users, smokeless users, and smokers in the United States in 1994, okay. And the non-users are in black, the smokeless users in white, and the smokers are the hashed cover. And this is essentially the survival by age, okay? And what you can see here is that as you age, this red here, the smokeless and the non-users are almost the same. They're almost indistinguishable. In other words, there's no excess mortality associated with smokeless. But the red is the excess mortality associated with smoking, okay? It's a huge difference. Now, when this paper came out in 1994, did all the tobacco control activists go, wow, here's a way we could save thousands of years of person lives, here's how we could save thousands of QALYs, here's how we could solve the problem of smoking? No, they went into action against the authors. They excluded and ostracized Brad Rodoux, who put this paper together. They said that this wasn't the way to solve the problems associated with smoking. And as a result, we still have 480,000 deaths per year in the United States, when this kind of insight could, as long ago as 1994, it's exactly the same in Europe with snus, could have informed an entirely different approach to tobacco. And we rejected it, and the cost has been tens of thousands of lives as a result. So we have to recognize it. It's an uncomfortable place to be, but I think we should be realists and proud of it, that we want to try to get the harms down, and we don't want to repeat the errors that are embodied in this chart of not playing against those red bars. Okay, so that's my Tobacco Control 2.0. That is it. Thank you so much. Okay.
you'll begin. Thanks a lot, Clive, for this wonderful overview. And everybody refreshed his or her English in just 3/4 of an hour. That was amazing. So, and thanks, we are benefiting from your long-term professionalism with the topic, and run through so many ways, and offering us, let's say, so many keywords for the Tobacco Control 2.0. Okay, this is it. I think we will swallow it. No? We will digest it with some food over here. And we will return, ich spreche auch schon Englisch. Wir kommen 20 vor 2 wieder zusammen, ja? Okay, dann guten Appetit. Danke nochmal.